In a life he had already lived and lost, Julian had been a wanderer, a swordsman of considerable renown, who met his end shielding his master from a fatal blow. It was a spectacular death, but futile. Master Valerius died anyway, driven to his end by the very novice he had taken under his wing. Now, Julian's eyes opened to a scene he remembered with chilling clarity. The day that same novice was brought to the Silverwood Sanctuary to be accepted. The boy who would become his junior brother was now presented as his first apprentice. The Archon Valerius, his master, a man renowned for his ascetic discipline and cold demeanor, declared that Julian would raise the child. The sanctuary's management would also fall to him, for Valerius intended to enter a long seclusion. From another corner of his memory, the voice of Kalen, the Void Lord who had perished with him in that other life, echoed with a sneering promise to give him a swift death if he surrendered Valerius. And as if the world wasn't already tilting on its axis, the small boy he was now tasked to raise would one day, years from now, offer him a newly crafted potion with an innocent smile, asking if his master wanted a sweet, its properties far from benign. Julian felt a phantom breathlessness. He was just the lead apprentice. Did his life mean nothing? While these fragments of a future past swirled in his mind, Valerius pushed a small, pale child forward, instructing the boy to acknowledge Julian as his master. Julian stared. It was him, the boy who, in the previous timeline, had committed the ultimate transgression. Julian's soul, tethered to a shard of a shattered relic after his own sacrifice, had witnessed it all. He saw the novice, grown and twisted, take advantage of Valerius's weakness after a great battle. He had imprisoned their master in the Grand Hall, a figure of desperate, maddened devotion. The last image seared into Julian's fading consciousness was of both of them lying in a pool of blood, a tragic, violent end. A child's voice, soft and uncertain, broke his reverie. The boy was looking at him with wide, curious eyes. His face was like porcelain, his features sharp and clear. His eyes, tipped upwards at the corners in gentle crescents, were framed by long, dark lashes that trembled slightly. A shiver ran down Julian's spine. He looked at Valerius, his mind screaming a question. This was supposed to be Valerius's apprentice, not his. The Archon, seated above them, returned his gaze with an impassive air. Julian instinctively protested, stating that his own experience was still lacking. Valerius cut him off with a tone that permitted no argument, commanding him to accept the boy first and discuss it later. Julian felt a wave of despair. A romance between a master and an apprentice was already a forbidden topic. If this boy developed feelings for his grandmaster, the sanctuary's reputation would be shattered. As the boy's direct master, Julian would be caught in an impossible position, blamed from all sides. He silently pleaded with Valerius to consider the burden he was placing on him, the lead apprentice who had to manage both his elders and the juniors. He wanted no part in their tragic destiny. But Valerius was the Archon of Silverwood Sanctuary, a man of glacial pride whose word was law. Besides, he was Julian's own uncle, his mother's younger brother. Julian looked down at the small, kneeling figure, like a perfectly carved ivory figurine. He sighed. The boy was still young. Perhaps his path could still be guided. Steeling himself, Julian addressed the child in a solemn tone, asking for his name. The boy looked up, his voice barely a whisper as he introduced himself as Elias. Julian knew the name, of course. He also knew the boy's grim history. His father, a wealthy merchant, had found a beautiful woman, a fey creature of the woods, and forcibly kept her, making her bear his children until she wasted away from sorrow. Not long after, The merchant's entire estate burned to the ground in a mysterious fire. Elias was the sole survivor. Julian thought the boy's history was too steeped in shadow. He told Elias that from this day forward, he would be Julian's apprentice. He bent down, trying to appear as kind as possible, and promised the small boy, who barely reached his thigh, that he could tell him anything, that he would never have to keep his troubles locked inside. In the past life, Julian had been away from the sanctuary so often that he barely knew his junior brother, remembering only a quiet, solitary boy. He never imagined that silence concealed such a tempest. Elias's expression was unreadable, but he nodded, his quiet affirmation a small seed of hope. Julian found himself ruffling the boy's soft hair. Master Valerius had always maintained a cool distance, his godlike face and preference for stark white robes creating an aura of untouchable allure that he seemed oblivious to. Julian, having seen the destructive end of that path, decided to do the opposite. He would provide the warmth and guidance of a father, hoping to steer Elias away from the abyss. True to his word, Valerius vanished after handing over the boy. When Julian saw him again 3 days later, his master was covered in wounds, his white robes stained crimson. The other elders rushed to his side, their stores of rare herbs and potent elixirs dispensed without a second thought. After 2 days of frantic effort, Valerius finally awoke. His first act was to formally announce his seclusion for several years, appointing Julian as the acting archon. He refused to speak of how he was injured or who his assailant was. The elders were frantic. Julian was frantic. He was a man who craved a life of carefree adventure, not the crushing weight of leadership. But Valerius gave him no room to refuse, leaving only his resolute back as he walked away. With the Archon's seal in hand, Julian's carefully cultivated reputation plummeted. He went from being the universally praised lead apprentice, good-natured and generous, to a stern taskmaster who seemed to offend everyone. The younger apprentices would complain that he had changed, storming off and leaving him to exchange weary glances with a silent Elias. Julian felt less like he had changed and more like he was breaking. His days were a blur of supervising training, managing the sanctuary's affairs, and planning for its future. He was as exhausted as an ox after plowing a field. His only solace was his new apprentice. Elias was obedient, but incredibly timid. He was afraid of the dark, of sleeping alone, of insects, of dogs, and, most woundingly, of Julian himself. It was a blow to Julian's pride. He who had always been seen as approachable could now make a child tremble with a single word. As the youngest in the sanctuary, Elias, with his delicate features, was doted on by the other elders and apprentices. But he remained withdrawn, his silence deepening, his energy fading. He would sometimes fall asleep standing up during the day. Soon, the novelty wore off for the others, and the task of caring for the boy fell entirely to Julian. Only Lena, the second apprentice, would occasionally bring by treats she had baked, like the glittering moon petal tarts she presented one afternoon. Elias ate one piece and promptly dozed off at the table. Julian gently carried him to bed. Lena whispered a theory she had heard. Valerius had been investigating the massacre at the merchant's estate when he found Elias huddled in a corner. She wondered if the boy was still suffering from the shock. Her words sparked a memory for Julian. In his past life, Valerius had mentioned that Elias's etheric channels were unstable, making him prone to catastrophic failure when he channeled energy. To counter this, Julian had given him his soul stone amulet, a relic that nourished one's inner energy. But the amulet itself required a measure of strength to use, and right now Elias was so frail a rabbit could best him. A different solution was needed to prevent his inner demons from taking root. That evening, Julian asked Elias gently if he was having nightmares. The boy shook his head. When asked why he wasn't sleeping, Elias looked at him with wide, cautious eyes before his head drooped. He apologized, though Julian assured him he had done nothing wrong. He reminded Elias of his promise that he could share anything. After a long hesitation, the boy confessed that his mother used to hold him as he slept. He was afraid to be alone, afraid of the others who would frighten him in the night. So it was nightmares after all. Julian offered to find someone to stay with him. The living options proved unsuitable. Marcus, the third apprentice, snored loudly. The fourth, Leo, ground his teeth. And Finn, the fifth, drooled and sometimes chewed on his blankets. Elias shrank back in fear at the descriptions. So Julian took a piece of white cloth and sewed a doll the same size as the boy, stuffing it with cotton and adding crude eyes and a mouth. He couldn't bear to look at his creation as he presented it to the silent boy, trying his best to sell its merits. It was ugly, he admitted, but at least it wouldn't eat him. The next day, the dark circles under Elias's eyes were even more pronounced. Julian asked if the doll had somehow attacked him. The boy, looking dazed with exhaustion, shook his head and admitted that he felt even more frightened at night. Julian glanced at the white doll on the bed, its wide, stitched eyes staring back, and found he couldn't argue. As a last resort, he moved Elias's cot next to his own bed. In the middle of the night, he felt a small body crawl in beside him, curling up against his chest and burying its face in his tunic. A soft, sleepy murmur escaped the boy's lips. "Mama," Julian sighed, his hand hovering before he let it fall. The boy was just a child, still smelling of milk and sleep. He would wait. Being a master was turning out to be a role that encompassed fatherhood, and now, it seemed motherhood as well. Silverwood Sanctuary was an order of Bladesworn, known for its powerful sword arts. Archon Valerius was the undisputed master. It was said that a seer once foretold a fatal calamity in his destiny, one that could only be avoided if he remained in seclusion for his entire life. Judging by the previous timeline, the prophecy was real. In that life, Julian had returned from his travels to find a scene of devastation. Valerius and the Void Lord Kalen had fought to a standstill. In a final, desperate act, Kalen had summoned the Celestial Gyre, an artifact of world-ending power, intending to take Valerius with him. Valerius was too weak to resist, but Julian had intervened, using a forbidden blood rite to become a living shield, destroying the artifact at the cost of his own life. This time, he had to destroy that relic before Kalen ever laid hands on it. The sanctuary also needed to be strengthened. He intensified the training regimen for the junior apprentices, earning their gritted teeth resentment. But one person frustrated him in a different way. Years had passed. Others had advanced several stages in their training, but Elias still couldn't even make a sword levitate. Julian felt a profound sense of failure. He remembered Elias from the last life reaching a significant level of power. How could he be so inept under his tutelage? He watched as Marcus tried to guide Elias. "Focus your ether," Marcus instructed. "Now channel it into the blade. Recite the incantation. Lift." The sword wobbled, reluctantly rising a few inches from the ground. Everyone held their breath. Julian, sitting to the side, calmly lifted his teacup. As he raised the lid, a loud clatter broke the silence. The sword was back on the ground. Elias stared at Marcus, who mirrored Julian's own exasperated gesture of pressing his hand to his forehead. It was Marcus who had boasted he could teach Elias sword levitation in 3 days, wagering a month of cleaning Julian's rooms. This was the third day. After a long pause, Marcus could only manage a weak suggestion that it would be fine for Elias to simply share his master's sword when flying. Elias had grown considerably, the boyish softness giving way to the sharp, handsome lines of a young man. He was no longer the sullen child who first arrived. Hearing Marcus's suggestion, he looked at Julian with an inquisitive expression. Julian quickly agreed, saying that not everyone was meant to master every art. Elias's eyes lit up. He asked if Julian would take him flying sometime. Of course, Julian agreed. The next day, after his duties were done, he took Elias to the edge of Eagle's Peak. An idea had struck him the night before, inspired by tales of eagles teaching their young to fly. He would try a more direct approach. At sunset, the clouds below were a vast, roiling sea of gold. The wind howled around them. Elias's face was a mask of calm, but his knuckles were white where he gripped Julian's sleeve. Julian decided to tease him, explaining a fabricated legend about the cliff. It was said that anyone brave enough to leap from the edge would instantly grasp the secret of flight. He asked if Elias was afraid. The boy's face paled, his grip tightening. He insisted he wasn't scared. Julian chuckled and pinched his cheek, pointing out that his voice was trembling. Elias stubbornly blamed the wind. Julian relented, patting his shoulder and telling him to do his best. Elias took a hesitant step forward, peering over the edge. Julian laughed, about to admit he was joking, when the boy suddenly pitched forward and disappeared over the side. A raw, strangled cry tore from Julian's throat. Elias! He had never felt such a potent mix of terror and fury. The boy would believe anything, to jump without a word of. Julian's legs felt weak, but instinct took over. He dove after him, catching him just in time. The thought of what would have happened if he hadn't, of the boy's body dashed on the rocks below, made him want to rage. But the object of his anger was unconscious in his arms. He carried Elias back, his heart pounding a furious rhythm against his ribs. He administered a calming elixir. When the elders asked what happened, Julian was too embarrassed to explain his reckless teaching method. He ended up venting his frustration in a sparring match with Marcus. Whether it was the shock or the elixir, Elias woke up having truly mastered the art of sword levitation. His test flights were chaotic, resulting in several collisions with other apprentices, which led to him being banned from flying in populated areas. Julian took the opportunity to scold him soundly. Elias stood with his head bowed, accepting the criticism. Once Julian's anger subsided, he approached, a curious look on his face. He mentioned that after he fainted, he felt Julian give him something. He said the experience of fainting had been surprisingly pleasant. Julian was dumbfounded. That was a dreamwood elixir, meant to prevent nightmares from the shock. One dose was worth a small fortune. Elias's interest was piqued. He begged Julian to teach him alchemy. Julian waved him off, admitting he knew nothing of the art. He had purchased the elixir. Elias looked disappointed, but his question sparked an idea. Not everyone was suited for the sword. Lena loved to cook. Marcus was fascinated by tactical formations, Leo by cosmetics, and Finn was an alchemist. He was a half-baked one, who had once famously brewed a purification potion so poorly that its fumes knocked out everyone in a 10-mile radius, including the birds in the rafters. But still, Julian immediately took Elias to Finn's workshop. The good news was that Finn declared Elias had a natural talent, an innate sensitivity to herbs and reagents. The bad news was that together they blew up the alchemy lab. Finn blamed Elias and demanded Julian pay for a new one. Julian suspected extortion but had no proof. Alchemy was an expensive pursuit. Watching them burn through costly herbs made Julian physically ill. To prevent further waste, he decided to send them both to the Viridian Apothecary, a renowned order of alchemists. He had befriended their leader during his travels and secured them positions as external disciples. But at the last moment, Elias refused to go. So Julian changed tactics and asked the apothecary to send one of their disciples to Silverwood instead. The old master stroked his beard and scoffed, asking why his disciple should have to leave if Julian's wouldn't. After signing a series of outrageously one-sided treaties, Julian finally returned to Silverwood with a skilled alchemist in tow. The cost had depleted his personal savings. Exhausted, he shooed Elias and Finn away as soon as they entered the gates, telling them to go practice their alchemy. The two, who had been silent and fearful the whole journey, grinned and thanked him before scurrying off. "And don't blow up this lab," he yelled after them, "or I'll send you both into orbit. Don't come see me until you've brewed an elixir of immortality." Late one night, Elias crept into Julian's room like a thief. He tiptoed to the bed and lay down. Julian, half asleep, felt something being pressed to his lips. He jolted awake, staring at the round, white object in Elias's hand and demanded to know what it was. Elias blinked. The elixir of immortality. Julian stared, incredulous. He had made the elixir of immortality in a single day. He backed away, retorting that Elias's idea of immortality must be not living long enough to get old. Elias's brow furrowed, a hint of hurt in his voice as he asked if his master didn't trust him. It was a familiar tactic. Julian sighed, took the unknown pill, and swallowed it in one go. An intensely sweet flavor flooded his senses. He opened his eyes in surprise. Elias watched him with an expectant expression, asking if it was good. The sweetness was overwhelming. Julian couldn't help but smile, ruffling the boy's hair. It was delicious, he admitted, but he warned Elias never again to use the expensive new lab to make candy. Especially not candy he tried to pass off as a legendary elixir. Elias just smiled, a clear sign that had gone unheeded. The boy was becoming more and more audacious. Julian felt a strange mix of exasperation and fondness. It was better than the constant gloom from before. Elias and Finn became obsessed with alchemy. Elias would often spend all night in the lab or the library, and Julian sometimes wouldn't see him for weeks. He should have been pleased with his apprentice's diligence, but something felt off. After a while, Elias moved out of Julian's chambers, claiming he didn't want to disturb his master's rest. Julian agreed, thinking it was time for the boy to have his own space. The new room was close by, within earshot of his own courtyard. He grew accustomed to the sound of Elias's door opening and closing each night, a sound he needed to hear before he could fall asleep. One day, Finn burst in, frantic. He reported that Elias had locked himself in his room for several days, and he had just heard a loud crash from inside. A knot of dread tightened in Julian's stomach. He rushed to Elias's quarters. The room was sealed with a simple ward that Julian easily bypassed. Inside was chaos. Furniture was overturned, and Elias lay on the floor, pale and still. His pulse was erratic, his forehead beaded with cold sweat, and his body trembled uncontrollably. His skin alternated between deathly pale and feverishly flushed. The side of his waist was searing hot to the touch. It resembled a catastrophic channeling failure, but it was different somehow. Terrified, Julian poured his own ether into Elias, then carried him to the luminous spring. He submerged the boy's body in the warm, healing waters. He administered a purification potion and a dreamwood elixir, using his own energy to help them take effect. After what felt like an eternity, Elias's pulse stabilized. Exhausted, Julian leaned against the edge of the pool and closed his eyes. A practitioner of the arts was always alert. The moment he felt a gaze upon him, his eyes snapped open. He met Elias's dark, clear eyes. Steam rose from the water, and droplets clung to the boy's long lashes, trembling like tiny jewels. Julian's breath caught. The boy's eyes. They were breathtakingly beautiful. When he found his voice, he asked Elias how he was feeling. Elias smiled faintly, assuring him he was fine and apologizing for the trouble. Julian's expression turned serious as he demanded to know what had happened. Elias looked down, explaining that he had tried to force a breakthrough during his practice and lost control. Julian studied his face, unconvinced. Elias knew the unique difficulties of his own channeling. Why would he suddenly attempt something so reckless? Sighing, Julian took the boy's wrist to check his pulse again. He told him to rest for a few days and not to rush his training. As he stood to leave, he hesitated, then turned back, asking if Elias was too weak to walk and needed to be carried. A blush crept up Elias's neck, and he quickly refused, trying to stand. But his legs gave way and he slipped. Julian moved instantly, catching his arm. Still pretending to be strong, he lifted Elias from the water. The boy's clothes were soaked, and the cool night air raised goosebumps on his skin. His warm breath ghosted across Julian's neck. Julian's own body tensed, and he quickened his pace. After settling Elias in his room with a few more words of caution, he left. But he couldn't shake his unease. He ended up sitting on the porch outside, watching the moon. 10 years had passed since his rebirth. He remembered when Elias was small enough to be held with one hand supporting his head and the other his ankles, as light as a feather. Now the boy had grown into a young man, and carrying him was a substantial weight, a reminder of the time that had passed. Those clear eyes now held unspoken words, secrets he chose not to share. The boy was growing up. Julian knew he needed to start keeping a more appropriate distance. On the day of the grand rite, the main hall was prepared, but Leo, the fourth apprentice, was missing. He had been away for 2 months without a word. Julian felt a growing sense of dread, but the ceremony had to begin. Just as he was about to give the order, a commotion at the entrance announced Leo's return. The once immaculate and handsome young man was now pale and emaciated, looking as if a strong gust of wind could topple him. The sanctuary's chief healer rushed over and, after a quick examination, pointed to a strange mark on Leo's chest. It was a sigil like a moon petal. The healer declared that Leo's life force had been drained by a fey creature. Any later, and he would have been beyond saving. The mark seemed familiar to Julian, but he couldn't place it. With the entire sanctuary waiting, he had to proceed with the rite, leaving Leo in the healer's care. Reports from the nearby town confirmed that a fey had been preying on young men, and the locals were requesting aid from Silverwood. Julian decided he and Lena would investigate. Before leaving, he instructed Elias to rest and not to practice in secret. The boy had seemed lethargic for days, and Julian felt guilty for being too preoccupied to pay him closer attention. Elias nodded meekly. As Julian turned to leave, Elias grabbed his sleeve. He spoke of a dream he'd had at the spring, a dream where he became a monster. He asked Julian what he would do if it were real. The question, delivered in a soft voice, struck an odd, painful chord in Julian. He reassured Elias that even if he were a monster, he was Julian's monster, and he would never cast him out. Fearing more nightmares, he gave Elias a vial of dreamwood elixirs. The boy's recent malaise must have been due to bad dreams. Julian suddenly had a heartbreaking image of Elias waking up terrified and crying silently into his pillow. On the road, Lena teased him, saying he was more like a mother than a master. That night, they split up to patrol the town. Outside a lavishly decorated hall, Julian finally sensed a faint fey aura behind him. He quickened his pace, intending to lure the creature to a more secluded area. Suddenly, Lena's voice rang out. "You foul creature, trying to sneak up on my master." She charged, sword drawn, and yelled at Julian to pay attention. Julian sighed in exasperation. While Lena engaged the creature, he set up a containment ward. A flash of white light illuminated the fey's face, and Julian froze. The resemblance was uncanny. The face, now intimately close, whispered in a seductive voice, "Master, would you truly bear to see this face scarred?" The word master disoriented him for a second before he recognized the illusion. But Lena, seeing only the creature, thrust her sword towards its forehead. Julian reacted instantly, blasting the fey away with a wave of force. Lena's strike hit empty air. The fey coughed up blood, and Lena stared at Julian, incensed, demanding to know why he was interfering. The creature's eyes were so much like Elias's, yet they held a cunning and cruelty that made Julian deeply uncomfortable, whereas Elias's held only clarity and trust. He demanded to know why she was preying on mortals. She laughed, calling her victims pathetic men who deserved to have their life force drained as payment for their deceits. Lena retorted that it was just an excuse. The fey then turned her pitying gaze on Lena and sneered, "This master of yours, so righteous in appearance, nearly lost his senses at the mere sight of my face. How is he any different from them?" Julian coldly informed her not to flatter herself, reminding her whose face she was using. Unperturbed, the fey's smile widened. She mused that because she looked like his apprentice, he would let her go, letting his thoughts wander while looking at his apprentice's face. Realizing he had been tricked, Julian snapped at her to be silent. Lena looked from the fey to Julian, her expression one of shocked confusion, before she aimed her sword at the creature again, roaring, "How dare you slander my master's name?" Julian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lena insisted they kill the fey for the harm she'd caused. But the creature just smiled smugly at Julian. "Go on, kill me," she dared, "and you'll never see your precious apprentice again." She dangled a pendant from her fingers. Julian's heart stopped. It was the soulstone amulet, which he'd given to Elias, and which the boy never took off. She taunted him, revealing that his apprentice had secretly left the sanctuary. Julian suppressed his rising panic. He channeled his ether, his sword splitting into a dozen phantom blades that surrounded the fey. Her confidence wavered, surprised by his decisiveness. Suddenly, a cloud of black smoke exploded outwards, obscuring his vision. Acting on pure instinct, he thrust his sword backward. A cry of pain echoed as the smoke cleared. The fey clutched a wounded shoulder. Knowing she couldn't escape, she offered a deal. She would take him to Elias, but he had to come alone. Julian agreed, signaling Lena to return to the sanctuary. In a damp, dark cave, Elias lay on the ground, unconscious. As Julian reached for him, a strange power erupted from the boy's body, binding Julian tightly. The figure on the ground shifted, transforming into a white fox. Another illusion. The fey laughed, telling him the enchanted ropes would only tighten if he struggled. Julian coldly demanded to know where his real apprentice was. She feigned surprise, asking if he truly didn't know that his apprentice was a half-breed, part fey himself. As she fed the white fox a pill, it transformed into the human shape of Elias. Elias was fey, How was that possible? Valerius had never mentioned it. The Fae sauntered over, stroking Julian's cheek. A man of the sacred arts, risking his life for a half-breed. Do you regret it? As she moved, Julian caught sight of a moon petal sigil on her wrist. The memory clicked into place. Years ago, in his past life, he had accidentally seen the same mark on Elias's waist. She struck him with a blast of energy, sending him crashing to the ground, blood spilling from his lips. "Master!" Elias cried out, awake but paralyzed, his eyes wide with fear. So that was it. That was why his training was so difficult, why his ether was unstable. It wasn't a channeling issue. It was a suppressed magical nature on the verge of breaking free. The Fae offered another deal. Give her Elias, and she would let Julian go. Julian struggled to his feet, his voice unwavering. Elias is my apprentice. Whether Fae or demon, he is mine. The Fae's expression flickered with something unreadable. She revealed that Elias was her sister's child, and while he carried the blood of a beastly human, she wouldn't harm him too much. Julian saw his chance. While he secretly worked to break the ropes, he played for time. But the words that came out of his mouth were an immediate refusal. He couldn't even feign agreement. It would hurt Elias too much. Seeing his resolve, she attacked again. Just as Julian prepared for the impact, a golden ward flared to life before him, deflecting the blow and blasting the Fae backward. A figure in white strode into the cave, his voice like ice. Useless. Both of you. Julian felt a wave of relief, followed by a surge of irritation. Master Valerius, why are you out of seclusion? Valerius gave him a brief, cutting glance. To collect your corpse. The ward on Elias dissolved, and the boy scrambled to Julian's side, his face a mask of guilt and shame. Master, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left. I wanted to understand my heritage, but I only endangered you. Please punish me. Valerius's gaze fell on Elias, entirely without surprise. He had known all along. Of course he had. He was the one who brought Elias to the sanctuary. Julian pushed Elias gently, reminding him to greet his grandmaster. Elias looked up at the Archon, stunned into silence. Julian's heart sank as he remembered the tragic love story from his past life. The full story was revealed. Elias's mother was a Fae who had been wounded by a hunter in the employ of the merchant who later saved her. He had imprisoned her and forced her to bear his child. When he saw Elias was a seemingly ordinary human, he despised him for his Fae blood and neglected him. Elias had watched his mother die, then saw his home burn, the trauma of it all causing a fever that erased his memories. The nightmares, however, remained. Valerius, having matters to attend to, left them with instructions to return only after Julian had recovered. The Archon's words replayed in Julian's mind. He looked at Elias, his heart aching with a mixture of pity and anger. For 2 days, Elias attended to him, silent and attentive. The smell of bitter medicine preceded his entrance into the room. Master, it's time for your medicine. His voice was soft, afraid of disturbing or angering Julian. Julian kept his eyes closed, telling him to leave it. Elias insisted it would grow cold and more bitter. Julian opened his eyes and stared until the boy fell silent. The tension was suffocating. Finally, Julian broke it, patting the space beside him on the bed. He had questions. He asked about the dream Elias had mentioned, the one where he became a monster. He wanted to know what Julian had done to him in that dream. Elias looked baffled by the question, his face growing strange before he looked down, the tips of his ears turning red. Julian pressed him. Had he been beaten? No. Cast out? No. Skinned alive and made into a cloak? Elias looked up, his tone certain. Master would never do that. Julian's voice was sharp with frustration. Then why didn't you tell me when you suspected something was wrong? Why were you so guarded? Am I so untrustworthy in your eyes? Elias looked wounded. I was never guarding against you, Master. I was just afraid. Julian lifted his chin, studying the handsome face, the upturned eyes. You're part Fae, not a fool, he said, his voice softening. Your heritage doesn't matter to me. Your character is what I value. Elias stared at him, then his shoulders slumped. Is that only because I am your apprentice? The question caught Julian off guard. He didn't know how to define their relationship. In the past life, they were brothers in arms, not particularly close, but still family. This life had forged a different, deeper bond. It wasn't wrong to say it was because of their master-apprentice relationship. To lift their spirits, Julian decided to take Elias into town. But when he went to find him, he learned from an innkeeper that Elias had gone off on his own to a notorious establishment known for its beautiful courtesans and hedonistic clientele. A man at the bar told Julian that his apprentice had been plied with drink and dragged away by a group known for kidnapping and selling handsome young men. Panic seized him. He burst through the establishment's doors to find a scene of chaos. Men were brawling everywhere, their movements frenzied and unnatural, as if under a spell. He spotted a familiar figure with his back to him. Julian called his name. Elias flinched and then collapsed. Julian moved through the brawl, a wave of his power temporarily incapacitating the men, and caught Elias before he hit the floor. The boy was dressed in flimsy, revealing silks, with delicate chains on his wrists and ankles. Julian's brow furrowed. He broke the chains, leaving red marks on Elias's skin from the force. Master, Elias whimpered. Quiet, Julian snapped, throwing a proper robe over him. He had the authorities handle the aftermath. On the way back, a sullen Elias explained that he'd been tricked, that the drink had made him powerless. Julian was speechless with anger. It didn't add up. Elias was an alchemist. How could he not recognize a common sedative? Elias claimed he'd lost his antidote pouch and the wine had smelled too good to resist. And why hadn't he run when the fight broke out? He confessed he had been too fascinated by the spectacle to remember to escape. Julian felt a headache coming on. The boy was going to get himself killed for the sake of gossip. As he was lamenting having raised an idiot, he saw Elias wistfully holding the scandalous silk garment, his eyes shining. Julian snatched it and incinerated it with a flash of power. Elias looked crestfallen, murmuring how beautiful it was. Julian glared, but the boy then looked at him with unnerving seriousness. Master, if you were to wear it, be quiet, Julian roared. He was deeply troubled. A man shouldn't be so fond of such attire. Was he naturally inclined toward men? With Valerius now out of seclusion, and the two of them seeing each other daily, Julian's headache intensified. That evening, Valerius himself appeared at their door. Julian and Elias both bowed. Greetings, Master. Greetings, Grandmaster. Valerius's gaze shifted between them. Julian braced himself. A love-at-first-sight reunion was entirely possible. He cautiously asked if Valerius was planning to return to seclusion. Valerius replied with a cold question. What? Have you grown fond of being Archon? Julian hastily denied it, claiming he was unequal to the task, that he had failed to manage the sanctuary and teach his apprentice properly. Valerius nodded. True. You cannot do two things at once. A weight lifted from Julian's shoulders. He could take Elias away, travel the world, and avoid the disaster. But then Valerius continued, "Therefore I will teach my apprentice. You will focus on managing the sanctuary." Julian thought he had misheard. Valerius teaching Elias meant they would be together constantly. Elias was at an age of intense, pure emotions. Valerius was impossibly alluring. The boy would fall in love, be rejected, and turn into the same obsessive madman from the past. The 10 years of careful parenting would be for nothing. The thought of the little sprout he had so carefully raised being trampled by Valerius made his chest tighten. "I wouldn't dare trouble you, master," Julian stammered, making excuses about Elias's special needs and shy nature. But Elias himself spoke up, his voice clear. "Master, I wish to train with the Grandmaster." One was willing to teach, the other eager to learn. Julian was powerless to stop them. That night, as he tended to the bruises Elias had earned from his first day of training with Valerius, he tried to plant seeds of doubt. He remarked on how harsh Valerius was, far harsher than he ever was with other apprentices. Elias, wincing in pain, simply said it was for his own good, that he felt his power flowing more smoothly than ever before. Julian felt a pang of jealousy. He tried again, Elias, that Valerius was merciless to his disciples and to not expect any affection. He even told a cautionary tale of a powerful figure who had professed love for Valerius, only to be brutally beaten and exiled. Elias looked shocked, and Julian felt a glimmer of success. But then the boy bit his lip and asked, his voice trembling, "Master, don't you? Is that why will you exile me too?" No, what? Had he already fallen for Valerius? So soon? Julian struggled to remain calm. He assured Elias he would never cast him out, that such feelings were natural as one grew up, but that he must learn to control them. He rambled about the need for a calm heart in one's training, against heartbreak and its dark consequences, his own words becoming a jumbled mess. Elias just stared at him, a faint blush on his face. "Master, you are very interesting." Then his expression became resolute. "As long as you do not send me away, I can endure anything." It was useless. Julian could only hope that first-hand experience of Valerius's cold cruelty would extinguish the boy's infatuation. But he underestimated Elias's determination. The training was brutal. Elias would return late each night, exhausted and often injured, yet he would always insist that his grandmaster was good. One night, he stumbled in, too tired to even open his eyes, and collapsed into Julian's arms, murmuring that his grandmaster was the best. The best? In just a few days? What was this grand generational affection? Julian wanted to toss him out into the cold to clear his head. He lifted Elias to carry him to bed, but the boy latched onto his robes, refusing to let go. When Julian tried to pull away, Elias tugged him down onto the bed with surprising strength. He curled up against Julian's chest, just as he had as a child, and murmured, "Master." The next morning, the other side of the bed was empty. Julian's robes were wrinkled, and he noticed what looked like faint teeth marks on the fabric over his chest. Had he been mistaken for a bone in the boy's sleep-addled state? He packed some food and went to find them in the bamboo grove where Valerius held his lessons. The Archon was relaxing in a chair while Elias practiced his sword forms, a blur of white against the green. Julian approached, offering the snacks he'd brought. Valerius looked at him with an unreadable, faintly amused expression. Julian tried to plead Elias's case, suggesting the boy was not suited for such harsh training and that he would look after him. He also brought up the growing threat of the Void Lord and the dangerous relic, urging Valerius to remain in the sanctuary to avoid his foretold doom. Valerius cut him off, rubbing his temples. "Julian, you sound like a mother hen. He looked at Elias, then back at Julian. He is dull-witted. But then, a dullard sees everyone as a dullard. Julian was certain he was being insulted. He began visiting the grove more frequently, determined to prevent Elias from falling deeper under Valerius's spell. Elias, noticing this, grew unhappy, asking if Julian was afraid his grandmaster was working him too hard. Julian, seizing the opportunity, agreed that Valerius seemed tired and suggested Elias give him a few days of rest. Elias, though disappointed, agreed. For the next 5 days, Elias holed himself up in the alchemy lab, working on what he called an important gift. For his grandmaster, no doubt. One night, Julian found him asleep on the floor of the lab, exhausted. As he carried him back, the sleeping boy stirred, murmuring that his dreamwood elixir was a success. He nuzzled closer, and Julian felt a sudden warmth against his earlobe. Elias mumbled 3 words, clear as a bell in the quiet night. Valerius, my love. The world crashed down around Julian. That night, his dreams were a torrent of fragmented memories from his past life's end. He saw Elias stun Valerius and imprison him. He saw Elias kneeling at their master's feet, pleading. He saw the final, bloody tableau. The pieces finally clicked into a horrifying picture. He took Elias to a remote cave in the back mountains. When the boy awoke, Julian's voice was strained. Elias, can you not see him anymore? Elias, still groggy, asked what he meant. Stop going to the bamboo grove, Julian clarified. Elias frowned, shaking his head, insisting he needed to become stronger. Julian's voice became hard. Then you will stay here in seclusion. Why? It's for your own good, Julian said, turning away. Elias scrambled after him. You can't accept it, can you? You hate me for it. A sharp pain lanced through Julian's heart, but he forced himself to be cruel. He erected a barrier at the cave entrance. Yes, he lied. So you had best get over it. I will come for you when you have. He knew it was a terrible solution, but it was better than letting him repeat the past. He would rather be hated than see him destroyed. That night, on the observatory platform, he saw a disturbance below the mountain. A wave of demonic energy. The Void Lord had come to Silverwood Sanctuary. But this was 2 years too early. He intercepted a disciple running to alert Valerius, telling him to inform the elders while he went to Valerius himself. It was a lie. He flew out to meet the invading force alone. As long as Valerius remained on his secluded peak, he would be safe. The calamity could be postponed. He confronted Kalen at the mountain's base. The Void Lord, clad in black robes threaded with silver, sneered. Well, nephew, is there no one else left? Hand over your master, and I will grant you a quick death. Julian's face was grim. He reminded Kalen that he had been exiled long ago, that he was no nephew of his, only an enemy. He unleashed an arsenal he had been secretly preparing for years, a collection of artifacts and weapons designed specifically to combat demonic forces. For a while, he held them off, but Kalen was too powerful. The Void Lord struck him down. Bleeding and injured, Julian lured him toward a frozen lake where he had laid a trap. A formation that would freeze and shatter everything within its radius, hopefully destroying the celestial gyre if Kalen had it. He poured the last of his ether into his sword. He had lived a bonus decade. He should have no regrets. But he had promised Elias he would come for him. Just as he was about to unleash the final attack, a force knocked the sword from his hand. Julian, a voice screamed. He looked up to see Valerius, Elias, and the other disciples rushing toward them. Elias caught him as he fell. How did you get out? Julian gasped. Elias's eyes were red. You sent me away because you were afraid I would be hurt, didn't you? You never planned to come back for me. Kaelin's eyes locked onto Valerius. My dear Valerius, you finally decided to see me. Valerius's reply was laced with scorn. Have you forgotten? I beat you senseless 10 years ago. Now you're back for more? The celestial gyre is long gone. You may as well be buried here. A blade of golden light erupted, screaming toward Kaelin. Julian's mind reeled. The gyre was already destroyed? 10 years ago? That meant Valerius was reborn too. As his consciousness faded, he collapsed into Elias's arms. Looking up at the boy's terrified face, he threw caution to the wind. Elias, he whispered, stop loving him. This time I'm your master. Can't you love me instead? Elias stared at him, stunned. The moment the words were out, the pain in Julian's body seemed to vanish, replaced by the frantic pounding of his own heart. All this time, his fear and anxiety had been tangled with something else he now recognized as jealousy. He had wanted Elias for himself. He tried to apologize for his presumption, but before he could speak, Elias's lips crashed down on his. He was kissing him. While their master and the Void Lord fought a world-shaking battle nearby, Julian was being kissed by his apprentice until he passed out. When he awoke, Valerius was sitting by his bed, scowling at a ledger. All this money, he said icily, on these useless trinkets, just for Kaelin. It's your fault for not telling me. Julian shot back. If I had known the gyre was destroyed, I could have saved a fortune. As if you didn't keep secrets of your own, Valerius retorted. Julian had no reply to that. Before he could ask the dozens of questions swirling in his mind, Elias stepped between them, telling the Archon that his master needed rest. Valerius gave them both a long look, then left, tossing a final that he would throw them out if they engaged in any more unseemly behavior. Now they were alone. Julian's ears burned. He adopted his most masterly tone. Come here. Elias stood frozen, his face a cold mask. He was still angry. Julian clutched his wound dramatically. Please don't be angry. It makes my injuries hurt. Elias came to his side. Master, Julian corrected him. Call me by my name. The boy's voice was stiff. Julian, not like I'm your master, Julian pushed. Softer this time, Elias whispered, Julian. Julian pulled him close, his lips brushing the boy's ear. That night, he murmured, you held me just like this. You bit my ear. But you called your grandmaster's name. Elias froze, his face flaming. What? Don't lie, I don't even know his first name. Julian paused, thinking. Valerius. My love. My love. Not Valerius, my love. Julian slowly slid under the covers, hiding his face. Master, he asked Valerius later, what about your fatal calamity? Valerius snorted. I never believed that old seer's ramblings. He also said you would marry a heavenly beauty. Everyone dies. The only solution is to be strong enough that no one can kill you. He explained that he had returned half an hour before Julian in this life. He had dumped Elias on him, gone straight to the demonic realm, beaten Kaelin half to death, and retrieved the celestial gyre. Then he spent 10 years in seclusion, mastering its power before destroying it and achieving a new level of strength. Then why, Julian asked, did you treat Elias so well, knowing what he did in the past life? Valerius fell silent for a moment. In the past life, I knew he was part Fae, but his mother had sealed his powers. I thought he could live a normal life. But his own insecurities, his belief that he was weak, led him to seek out forbidden arts to change his own body. He grew extreme. I later learned It was because he had developed feelings for you. Julian was floored. For me? But he imprisoned you, he imprisoned me to take my heart's blood every night, Valerius clarified. As your closest living relative, he believed my blood could be used in a ritual to resurrect you. The ritual required the guide to endure the pain of having their own soul torn apart. He was willing to do it. I was too weak to stop his madness. I never believed it would work, but it did. Soul-tearing pain. The daily agony of having his heart pierced. Two madmen. And Julian had known nothing. Elias was organizing newly brewed potions, his ears faintly pink. Why do you keep staring at me? Julian's heart felt too full. Because I like you, he said softly. I like watching everything you do. What had he ever done to deserve such love, spanning 2 lifetimes? Elias looked at him strangely. Master, you've been acting like you're possessed lately. Perhaps, Julian replied, a smile playing on his lips. Why don't you come here and check? Elias hesitated, then set down his tools and walked over. Julian pulled him onto his lap. Why haven't you been to the bamboo grove lately? I was afraid you would be unhappy. Besides, I found a recipe for a potion that can help Fae cultivate power quickly. Julian's hand tightened on his waist. You are forbidden from taking it, he said seriously. Go back to the grove tomorrow. I'm not angry. I want you to go. Elias looked surprised. Really? I was never angry, Julian insisted. You remembered wrong. Now, what was that important gift you were making? The boy was easily distracted. Oh, it was a dreamwood elixir, he said, pulling out a small porcelain bottle. I modified the recipe a little so it tastes like candy. How clever of you, Julian praised. Just as I taught you. Elias produced one of the round, white pills, a sly, fox-like smile on his face. Would you like one now? It's almost dusk. The perfect time for dreaming. An idea sparked in Julian's mind. He traced the boy's lips with his finger. Will you feed it to me? Elias's eyes widened, his lips parting in surprise. Julian took the opportunity to slip the pill into his mouth and then kissed him. After a long moment, a strange heat began to spread through his body. Elias was clearly feeling it too. Elias, Julian breathed against his lips. Are you sure you only added sugar? Well, maybe some other flowers and herbs. A brilliant addition, Julian praised, pressing their foreheads together. Elias, would you like to share a dream with me?